I always believed that family bonds were unbreakable and that helping your loved ones was not only a sign of kindness, but an unspoken rule. Whenever my younger sister Veronica came to me with problems, money for bills, health emergencies, or even an unexpected car breakdown, I tried my best to help. I never questioned her motives because I trusted her. She was my sister after all. Little did I know how much that trust would cost me. Over the course of nearly 3 years, I poured my savings into Veronica's never-ending crises. I told myself it was temporary, that someday she'd stand on her own 2 feet. I didn't realize that, behind my back, she was living a lifestyle that was far from desperate. And when I discovered her secret, everything changed in the blink of an eye. This is the story of how I found out my sister was using my money to travel and enjoy luxuries, while I was left struggling, and how I finally decided to cut her off for good. It started innocently enough. Veronica, who was 4 years younger than me, called one evening sounding distraught. She told me her rent was overdue, and her new job hadn't paid her yet. She had a daughter in kindergarten and a part-time job at a boutique. I sympathized and wired her enough money to cover her rent and a little extra for groceries. A month later, she called again. This time, it was car trouble. Her transmission had failed, and without her car, she couldn't get to work. According to Veronica, no one else could help her, and her ex-husband was completely out of the picture. She was in tears, apologizing for being a burden, promising she'd pay me back as soon as she got back on her feet. Of course, I believed her. I even felt guilty for making her feel like she had to beg. I didn't see the pattern forming yet. I just saw a single mother in crisis, and I had the means to help, so I helped every single time. But soon enough, the requests became more frequent and more elaborate. After 6 months of on and off financial assistance, I started to notice that certain items in my budget, like my own savings, were dwindling. My once comfortable emergency fund was slowly diminishing every time I stepped in to rescue Veronica from another catastrophe. On social media, she kept her accounts private, saying she was embarrassed by her living situation. She told me she didn't want anyone to see her struggles. I respected that. I was never the type to pry, and if she wanted privacy, I figured it was her right. Yet, every once in a while, I'd notice she'd mention a fancy coffee from a high-end cafe or a brand new phone upgrade. But when I questioned her about these inconsistencies, "I thought you said you were really tight on money," she always had an excuse. "I used a gift card. It was a promotion. My friend got it for me as a late birthday present." She never admitted to spending my money on anything frivolous. I chalked it up to little coincidences. Maybe she really did have gift cards. Maybe her friends were generous. I tried not to be paranoid. After all, if I couldn't trust my own sister, who could I trust? My parents, Carmen and Joseph, lived in another state. They didn't see Veronica's day-to-day life. All they knew was what she told them, and apparently, she'd painted a tragic picture. Single mom, overworked, with barely enough resources to keep the lights on. They believed her wholeheartedly. Who wouldn't? Sometimes my parents would pitch in, but they were semi-retired. Their resources were limited. So whenever Veronica was in dire straits, they'd call me, "Mia." My mom would say, "I'm worried about your sister. She's behind on her electric bill again. Can you help?" And I would. I wasn't wealthy, just stable, but I had enough to make sure my sister and niece weren't left in the dark. "Thank you," Mom would say. "We'll make it up to you somehow." But they never did, and I never expected them to. In my mind, helping Veronica was part of being a good big sister. About a year and a half into this arrangement, small cracks began to show in Veronica's story. One of my closest friends, Natalie, had moved temporarily to the same town where Veronica lived. Natalie got an apartment just a few blocks from my sister's place. While we were catching up on the phone, she mentioned in passing that she'd seen Veronica at a local nail salon. "I'm pretty sure it was her," Natalie told me. "She was getting a pedicure. She looked really relaxed." I shrugged it off, replying, maybe it was someone else, or perhaps it was a birthday treat. Still, the idea stuck in my mind. If Veronica was truly as broke as she claimed, how could she afford salon treatments? Over the next few months, Natalie occasionally mentioned spotting Veronica wearing what appeared to be new outfits or frequenting trendy restaurants. Each time I had an internal conflict. Was my friend misunderstanding the situation, or was my sister really not as strapped for cash as she portrayed? I felt torn, uneasy, but still not convinced Veronica would lie to me. The next time she called and asked for money, I did hesitate, but her sobbing on the phone pushed me over the edge. "Please, Mia, I'm behind on my car insurance. If I don't pay it, I can't drive. If I can't drive, I'll lose my job." I caved. Again. Fast forward another 6 months. My sister had borrowed a total close to $8,000 from me across various emergencies. I was frustrated, but I'd always chalked it up to familial duty. Then came the day that changed everything. It was a Sunday afternoon, and our mother decided to host a family dinner. She invited me, my parents, Veronica, and a few extended relatives. My dad had fired up the grill in the backyard, and we were all chatting around the kitchen, sampling appetizers. That's when Veronica casually mentioned her recent trip to the Caribbean. She was in the middle of describing the crystal clear water, how she'd swum with dolphins, and how the resort had the most amazing buffet. Her face glowed with excitement. I froze mid-bite. She had never told me she was going on vacation. In fact, just 2 weeks prior, she had urgently requested $600 for what she claimed was a medical bill. And now she was casually recounting a lavish trip to a tropical paradise? I tried to keep my composure, but my shock was obvious. "You went on vacation?" I asked, forcing a neutral tone. She nodded, wearing a smug grin. I needed a break. I was stressed. My parents fidgeted uncomfortably, especially my mom. Dad pretended not to hear, focusing on his grilled vegetables. I continued, How did you pay for that exactly?" Veronica gave a dismissive wave, her eyes darting from me to the rest of the family. "Don't worry about it. I saved up." In that moment, my mind reeled with all the times she'd cried broke. broke. All the frantic phone calls about overdue rent or the dreaded possibility of losing her car. My heart pounded. This was more than just a misunderstanding. I waited until later in the evening, after dinner. The dishes were mostly done, and people were scattered around the living room, talking and sipping coffee. I pulled Veronica aside into the hallway. "So," I began, crossing my arms, "you want to explain how you could afford a Caribbean vacation when you told me 2 weeks ago you couldn't pay your medical bills?" She blinked, feigning innocence. I had a friend who helped cover some expenses." My anger flared. "Really? So the thousands of dollars I've sent you over the past year, did that also go to your friend's vacation fund?" She rolled her eyes. "Stop being so dramatic. I have a right to enjoy myself once in a while." "You do," I retorted, my voice trembling with fury, "but you don't have the right to lie to me about needing money for your basic necessities and then use that money to fund your vacations." She scoffed. "This is why I didn't tell you. You'd never understand." Before I could reply, our father appeared. Having overheard the raised voices, he glared at me. "Mia, don't ruin this family gathering with your drama." My jaw tightened. "Dad, she's been lying to all of us for months, maybe years. Are you okay with that?" He looked at Veronica, who did the classic tear-up, bottom lip quivering. She needed a break. She's a single mother. At that, I lost it. "Being a single mother doesn't entitle her to steal from me," Veronica tried to interject. "I never stole anything. You gave me that money willingly. Under false pretenses," I shouted. The living room grew silent as relatives shifted uncomfortably. Mom came over and tried to soothe the situation, telling me to calm down. I shook my head, furious and betrayed. "That's it. I'm done, Veronica. No more money. Don't you dare ask me for another cent." I left my parents' house that night shaking with anger. My phone buzzed with texts from Veronica. Before I even reached home. "Veronica, way to embarrass me in front of the family. Veronica, you owe me an apology for that scene. Veronica, don't do anything stupid like stop paying for my insurance or rent. You'll regret it." I stared in disbelief at that last message, threatening me after everything she'd done. At home, I paced back and forth in my living room, replaying the evening in my head. All the lies, the manipulations, it was overwhelming. I couldn't believe how my parents had defended her. Had they known about her vacation all along? Or were they so blinded by favoritism that they refused to see the truth? Finally, I sat down at my computer, pulled up my online banking, and began the systematic process of shutting off every financial pipeline I had set up for Veronica. I canceled automatic transfers. I revoked my cosign on her insurance. I even flagged her name with my bank to avoid any future unauthorized transactions. I felt a surge of empowerment. Enough was enough. The next morning, I woke up to find over a dozen missed calls and messages on my phone. Veronica, my parents, even some extended relatives had all chimed in. Veronica's messages were the usual mix of guilt-tripping and demands. My parents had pleaded for me to be reasonable and think of the children. An uncle told me I was tearing the family apart over a small misunderstanding. Small misunderstanding? She'd lied about her finances for years, effectively scamming me out of thousands of dollars. That wasn't small. That was huge. I ignored most of the calls, except one from my mom, who left a tearful voicemail. "Mia, please think about how this will affect your niece. She might get bullied if they can't afford certain things. Don't punish the children for Veronica's mistakes." I loved my niece and worried about her well-being, but I realized that continuing to subsidize Veronica's lifestyle wasn't actually helping my niece. It was enabling my sister's deception. A few days later, my parents asked me to come over to talk things out. Against my better judgment, I agreed, hoping maybe they'd see reason. When I arrived, Veronica was already there, sitting on the sofa with her arms crossed. My parents sat on either side of her. The atmosphere was tense. My mother started by saying she appreciated everything I'd done, but that I should look at the bigger picture. My father chimed in, urging me to consider the family bond. Veronica remained silent at first. Then, after my parents ran out of platitudes, she spoke. "Fine. I admit I shouldn't have used your money for a vacation." I raised an eyebrow, waiting for a real apology. "But you don't understand how stressful my life is," she continued. "I needed a break, and if I told you the truth, you never would have helped me." My anger flared again. "So you're basically saying you had to lie to me to get what you wanted?" She nodded as if that was perfectly logical. "It's not lying. It's survival." I took a deep breath. "Look, I'm done being your personal ATM. I'm done with all the lies. I'm cutting you off. End of story." My father slammed his hand on the arm of the chair. "You're being heartless, Mia." My mother's eyes welled up. "How can you do this to your own sister?" I stood my ground, quietly collecting my belongings. How could she do this to me for so long? I'm not going to apologize for protecting myself now. With that, I left, feeling more certain than ever that I'd made the right call. In the weeks that followed, Veronica and my parents escalated their tactics. Veronica started posting vague messages on social media about cruel family members who abandoned single moms. Extended relatives began calling me, asking why I was punishing Veronica. At family gatherings, I was cast as the villain who turned her back on family values. My cousin, who initially supported me, told me that Veronica was telling everyone I'd refused to help her in a genuine crisis. Apparently, in her version of events, my money only ever went to urgent bills and groceries. I showed my cousin screenshots of Veronica's threats and her mention of traveling. My cousin, disgusted, apologized for doubting me, but many others still believed Veronica or simply felt I was being petty. One day, out of the blue, I received a message from Veronica's ex-husband, Raymond. We'd never been close, but he reached out apologetically. "I know we've never really spoken much," he wrote, "but I want you to know that Veronica's been telling people all sorts of lies about you. She told me you threatened to call Child Protective Services on her, which I'm pretty sure isn't true. I just wanted to say I don't believe her. I know how she operates." We ended up talking on the phone phone for over an hour. He revealed that Veronica had a history of manipulating people, including him, to get what she wanted. He mentioned that she often threatened to tarnish his reputation or restrict his visitation rights if he didn't comply. Over time, he'd distanced himself from her toxicity, only maintaining contact for their daughter's sake. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way," he said, "but I thought it was important you knew you're not alone in dealing with her." It was a surprising moment of solidarity from someone I'd once assumed was irresponsible or absent. Turns out he too had been a victim of Veronica's manipulations. This information fortified my resolve to keep her at bay. The hardest part of this entire ordeal was my niece, Lily. She was only 6 and had no idea about the conflict raging around her. For her, I was just Aunt Mia, the person who brought her gifts and read her bedtime stories whenever I visited. I worried that cutting Veronica off would indirectly hurt Lily. Could I still be involved in Lily's life without enabling Veronica's lies? It was a question that haunted me. I decided to reach out to Raymond. "If Lily ever needs anything, clothes, school supplies, a stable place to stay, please let me know," I told him. I love her, and I don't want her caught in the crossfire. He promised he'd keep me informed. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. At least I had a way to help Lily without funneling money through Veronica. As my blockade held strong, no more money, no more direct contact except through occasional texting, Veronica's desperation grew. She tried different tactics. 1. Unemotional blackmail. Sending tearful voice notes claiming Lily was suffering. 2. Public shaming. Writing cryptic posts on social media, painting me as a cold and unfeeling sibling. 3. Harassment through relatives. Encouraging our parents to guilt me into rescinding my decision. Nothing worked. I remained steadfast. I had already sacrificed too much, and I refused to continue down that path. One Saturday afternoon, I received an unexpected call from a travel agency. They asked to confirm final payment details for a luxury cruise to the Bahamas. Confused, I told them I had never booked such a trip. After a bit of digging, I found that Veronica had tried to book the cruise in my name, using my credit card details, which she must have memorized from the times I had bought her plane tickets under the guise of emergencies. I was livid. This was no longer just manipulation. It was fraudulent. I immediately called my bank, canceled the card, and reported the fraudulent attempt. The bank representative assured me that no money had been charged yet, but if it had gone through, I would have been on the hook for thousands of dollars. "This was my sister," I told the representative, my voice shaking. "I can't believe she would do this." Legally, I could have pursued serious charges against her. Part of me was tempted to do so, but the idea of seeing Veronica in jail, especially with Lily in the picture, made me hesitate. Instead, I threatened legal action if she ever tried anything like that again. In a text, I wrote, "If you attempt another stunt like this, I won't hesitate to file a police report." Her response was an enraged phone call. "How dare you threaten me with the police? I'm your sister." I hung up on her mid-rant. Some bridges needed to be burned to protect myself. Over the next several weeks, the storm slowly began to fade. Veronica realized I wasn't backing down. She stopped calling and texting, possibly because she was afraid I'd document every message as more evidence. My parents, exhausted from the drama and repeated confrontations, eventually stopped pressuring me directly. They likely realized I wasn't going to budge. I found myself in a calmer space emotionally. For the first time in nearly 3 years, I wasn't bracing for the next frantic call from Veronica. I focused on my own financial well-being, starting to rebuild my savings, considering a new job opportunity, and even planning a vacation of my own, something I hadn't done in years. A few months passed, and one day I received an unexpected phone call from Veronica. I hesitated to answer, but curiosity got the better of me. "Mia," she said, her voice subdued. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry." For a moment, my heart fluttered, hoping maybe she'd changed. Maybe she'd realized the error of her ways. But as the conversation went on, I soon realized she was mostly sorry about the consequences she faced, not about what she'd done. She mentioned that her attempts to secure more luxury items had backfired, and that some friends had started distancing themselves from her. "I'm in a tough spot right now. I could really use your help with Lily's school tuition." I sighed, and there it was, the inevitable request. "I'll help Lily if she needs it," I replied, "but I won't give you money directly. Send me the invoice for the school, and I'll see what I can do." Veronica became defensive. "Why can't you just trust me again?" I couldn't help but laugh, though there was sadness in my voice. "Trust is earned, Veronica, and you've done nothing to earn it back." She hung up. That was the last time we spoke for a long while. I made a formal arrangement with Lily's school that if any tuition payment was needed, I'd pay the school directly. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it allowed me to maintain a boundary. I would not funnel money through Veronica. If my parents or other relatives had a problem with that, it was their issue, not mine. Strangely enough, after I set this boundary, no tuition bills ever arrived. Lily never seemed to be in actual need. Eventually, I learned that Raymond had arranged a different payment plan for Lily's education, and Veronica's supposed crisis was more of her typical ploy. It only confirmed everything I already knew about her behavior. Sometimes, the hardest part of cutting someone off is dealing with the guilt and the memories. Veronica was my sister. We shared a childhood, a family history. We were supposed to have each other's backs. It hurt to realize she saw me as a walking wallet, but over time, I found peace in the knowledge that I had done everything I could, more than most people would, and I had to draw the line for my own well-being. By removing myself from the cycle of her manipulations, I regained control of my finances, my time, and my emotional health. I redecorated my apartment, started going to yoga classes, and even adopted a rescue dog named Jasper. Each small step forward felt like a reclaiming of my life from the drama and toxic dynamics that had dominated it for so long. About a year later, I ran into Veronica at a cousin's wedding. I hadn't seen her in person since the big blow-up. She looked good, well-dressed, confident, and if I'm honest, not at all like someone struggling financially. We ended up at the same table, and for the sake of family harmony, I tried to keep the peace. She was polite at first, even asking about my new job. For a fleeting moment, it felt like old times, like maybe we could rebuild some kind of sibling relationship without the manipulations. But as the evening wore on, she cornered me near the bar, adopting that familiar sweet tone. Mia, I've been thinking about everything. I know things got out of hand before. Maybe you could help me. Out, just once more, and I swear I'll pay you back with interest. I smiled ruefully. Veronica, I'm glad to see you're doing okay, but I can't and won't give you money. Let's just enjoy the wedding, okay? Her eyes narrowed, the sweetness evaporating. You're so bitter, she hissed, as though I owed her an apology. You need to grow up. I said nothing. I didn't need to defend my decision anymore. I simply walked away, leaving her standing there in her designer dress, furious that she couldn't control me anymore. Today, I live in a new city with a wonderful partner. We have a modest house, a garden, and a peaceful life free from the financial turmoil that once consumed me. My relationship with my parents is civil at best. They occasionally bring up Veronica's struggles, but they've largely stopped pressuring me. They know I won't change my stance. As for Veronica, I hear bits and pieces through the grapevine. Sometimes she's doing well, other times she complains about how everyone abandons her. We rarely speak, and when we do, it's superficial. Questions about birthdays, holiday greetings, that sort of thing. I used to feel guilty about abandoning my sister, but I realized I hadn't abandoned her. I had simply stopped enabling her. My sister made a choice to deceive me and live beyond her means at my expense. I, in turn, made a choice to reclaim my independence. We each live with the consequences of our actions, and as painful as it was, I don't regret it. I found out my sister used my money to travel, so I cut everything off. That sentence encapsulates the turning point of my life. It was the moment I realized I couldn't keep sacrificing my own financial security and mental health for someone who saw me as a bottomless resource. Walking away from that toxic dynamic was one of the hardest things I've ever done, but also one of the most liberating. Sometimes you have to let go of certain family ties to protect yourself, because love should be a two-way street, not a one-way drain on your life and happiness. In the end, I didn't just save money, I saved myself. Our word of advice: if you find yourself in a similar situation, constantly funding a relative or friend who shows no signs of genuine need, gratitude, or change, remember that setting boundaries is not heartless. It's a necessary act of self-preservation. You can care for someone without allowing them to take advantage of you, and if they truly value you, they'll understand and respect those boundaries. If they don't, perhaps they were never truly on your side in the first place.